talking about this Thomas Jefferson passage and going through the answers. Number one, Jefferson's central claim in the passage is that. And so keyword here is central claim. It's got to be about what basically the whole passage is about. And so with a question like this, I think it's good to just go through your answer choices and see what you can eliminate, see what you can kind of keep in the mix. So answer choice A, the current system of inheritance and ownership is unlikely ever to change. So the passage is definitely about that inheritance and ownership, but that unlikely to change, look right here where he says, I am conscious that an equal division of property is impracticable. So he recognizes making it perfect is not really practical. But then he's going to give us a bunch of different ways that we can at least make it better. And so maybe we're not going to change it to make it perfect, but we can change it. Another reason why I don't really like A is this unlikely ever to change. That ever denotes an extreme. And for the most part, we want to avoid extremes. So let's get rid of A. B, wealth should be redistributed in a way that benefits the majority of society. So again, it's that idea of redistribution of wealth, inheritance, ownership. And so let's see if we can find some times that he talks about, let's see if we can make it better, make wealth more distributed. And so here he talks about talking to that poor woman led him into a train of reflections on that unequal division of property. So he's recognizing property is unequal. Again, here, the property of this country is absolutely concentrated in a very few hands. So he's recognizing that's a problem. And then, if we come to the end, he says, I'm conscious that an equal division of property is impracticable, but the consequences of this enormous inequality producing so much misery to the bulk of mankind, that would be the majority, the bulk of mankind. Legislators cannot invent too many devices for subdividing property. So like the legislators should keep trying to subdivide property. And so here he says we should allow the descent of property in equal degree. So that would be, wealth, redistributing wealth so that it benefits the most people. And again, another means of silently lessening the inequality of property is to exempt all from taxation below a certain point. So again, he's trying to lessen the inequality. So that would be redistributing the wealth. So I really like B, but let's look at C and D. So C, the unemployed should use their energies to work the land rather than ask for money. Yet, yes, he does talk about that. He says, I asked myself at the end here of the first column, I asked myself what could be the reason that so many should be permitted to beg who are willing to work in a country where there's very considerable proportion of uncultivated land. But I don't think it's not the central claim, and he's not really blaming it on the unemployed. He's not saying the unemployed need to get off their butts and start working the land. It's the fact that the king and all of his cronies are using that land to hunt, and so they can't work the land. So not the central claim, and it's not really telling the unemployed to get to work. D, everybody has the natural right to as much property as he or she thinks necessary. I don't see that as the central claim, that everybody is going to give us the extreme. And Thomas Jefferson is just not saying that we all can just imagine how much property we want and that's how much property we should have. So our correct answer is B. Number 2. Jefferson uses the example of the woman he meets on the road in order to. And so it was that poor woman who told him about her, financial situation. and he gave her some money and she was so happy. And then he's going to talk about it's not just one woman, it's an entire country who's having, issues. And so let's go through our choices. So A, provide a moving anecdote in order to distract his reader from larger issues. Definitely not distracting. It's the exact same problem that he's talking about. So let's get rid of A. B, illustrate his surroundings with an atypical example of the native people. He then goes and talks about how there are so many people just like this woman. There's so many domestics. There's so many poor people who can't find work, so that she is not atypical. Let's get rid of B. C, support the claim that the economic situation is worse than Madison thinks. He never says anything about Madison. Yes, we see at the top that he's writing to Madison, but he never says you, and he never says anything about what's going on in the United States. And so let's get rid of C. I'm hoping D is good. So D, transition from his specific experience to a more general argument. And so yes, she has this specific financial experience that he's going to talk about, and then he's going to go on to say, then I started thinking about the general problem of unequal division of property. So I like D. Number 3, over the course of the passage, the main focus shifts from. So you're always going to get one of these shift questions. And so A description of the locale to a broader discussion of principles. So that is exactly how we started, the description of the locale. This is how many people live here. This is kind of what the scenery looks like. And then he talks about he wanted to go for a walk and see the sights. And then the last half, the shift could kind of be here when he meets the old woman, or it could be here when he then shifts into his general argument. And so I do really like A. B, a humorous anecdote to a position on a popular U.S. debate. Not humorous and not about the U.S. Get rid of B. C, an analysis of the king's situation to an analysis of an unemployed person's. He talks a little bit about the king, and then he talks about this unemployed person, but that kind of negates the whole second half of the passage. And so the whole passage, over the course of the passage, you want a shift that's going to include the stuff at the bottom too. And so C is just way too specific, comparing the king to that poor person. And then D, Jefferson's experiences in France to Madison's experiences in the U.S. We don't have anything about Madison. We don't have anything about the U.S. So get rid of D, and we go with A. Number 4, the main purpose of the passage's information about Fontainebleau is to. So Fontainebleau, right here, is where Jefferson is, the village. And so why are they going to tell us all about Fontainebleau? And so A, provide a picturesque counterpoint to the terrible poverty that Jefferson witnesses. Maybe it is picturesque, but is that the purpose? Is the purpose to talk about how beautiful it is? I'm not sure. B, describe a foreign land to someone who has never visited France. He never says that. He never says, you've never been to France, so let me tell you about it. So get rid of that. C, contextualize the anecdote and argument that follow. So anecdote would be seeing the woman on the street and talking to her, and then the argument about there are all these poor people in France, and so to give it context, maybe he does need to describe the area where he is, Fontainebleau. It's not Paris. It's, a village with a lot of land. So I kind of like C. D, interest the reader in the narrative before changing topics. I don't think that's why he talks about Fontainebleau. It's not like, the rest of this is going to be super boring, so let me give you some interest. Fontainebleau is not really the hook to the rest of it. And so let's get rid of D. And so then, is it either to provide, what's the purpose? Is it to talk about how beautiful it is? compared to how terrible France as a whole is? Or is it to give us some context for the argument that this is the land where these people live, and then these people have problems because the land isn't allowed to be cultivated? I like C. So number 5, Jefferson implies that the initial purpose of his walk was to. And so right here he says, this being the first trip, I set out yesterday morning to take a view of the place. For this purpose, I shaped my course towards the highest of the mountain in sight, to the top of which was about a league, so like a unit of measure. And so this is number 5. We also have an evidence question. And so he set out yesterday to take a view of the place. And so that is going to be A, better understand physical geography around him. And then let's see if that line number is going to match up with one of these. Looks like B for 6. Lines 13 and 14 matches up. Number 7, what main effect does the phrase flower of the country, line 40, have on the tone of the passage? And so let's go back to that point over here. He's talking about the property of this country. I'll start there. The property of this country is absolutely concentrated in a very few hands, having revenues of from $500,000 of guineas a year downwards. These employ the flower of the country as servants, some of them having as many as 200 domestics, so that's like another word for a servant, not laboring. They also employ a great number of manufacturers, tradesmen, lastly. And so why does he use that word, the flower of the country? So he's talking about the servants or the flower of the country. It lightens the tone by providing a metaphor of beauty in an otherwise bleak narrative. It definitely is a bleak narrative. So don't hate A. Let's go to B. It provides an impassioned tone to describe the discrepancy between the relative privilege of the few and the hardship of the many. That's definitely what he's describing here. The privilege of a few and then the hardship of the many. The flower of the country, so like the majority of the country are servants. So I like B2. C, it creates a tone of praise by comparing the workers of France to those of the U.S. Nothing about the U.S. here, so get rid of C. D, it creates an optimistic tone by showing that the people of France are variously employed. No, it is not optimistic, and he then goes on to talk about how all these people in France are not employed. Okay, so then we are lightening the tone with a metaphor of beauty or describing the discrepancy between the privilege of a few and the hardship of a many. Which one is more in line with what Thomas Jefferson is trying to say throughout the passage? That is going to be B. And I would say this is a hard question. So if you missed it and you put A, brush your shoulders off. It's okay. All right, number 8. As used in line 49, game most nearly means. So let's go up to line 49. And so he's talking about in this country, there's very considerable proportion of uncultivated lands. These lands are kept idle, so like not in use, mostly for the ask of game. And so here they're not farming the land because they have an ask of game. Ask with an E, that's a little bit strange. If we remember, if we go back to the beginning of the passage, that why is the king here in Fontainebleau? He's here to hunt. And so game would be talking about the animals to be hunted. So they don't want to farm the land because they want to keep it available for hunting. So D. Number 9, which choice best describes Jefferson's attitude towards socioeconomic conditions in France? So let's go through our answer choices. A, he approves of the king's policies on most, but not all issues. And so he talks about here the king that the king is coming to Fontainebleau to hunt, and it's really expensive to live here. So Thomas Jefferson has to stay in Paris. But he doesn't really bring up the king again. And now, while these are the policies of the king, I would say he has a real problem with most of them, because that's what the rest of the passage is about, is the unequal distribution of wealth. So I really don't like A. B, he sees France as an isolated case with unique conditions not applicable to other countries. If we look right here, he talks about the unequal division of property, which occasions the numberless instances of wretchedness which I had observed in this country and is to be observed all over Europe. And so this is the case all over Europe. And so we could not say it's an isolated case in France. So get rid of B. C, he is affronted by the few opportunities given to the poor. Affronted being like he's upset with or he's offended by. And so he talks about this poor lady, that he was affronted by her situation, that she couldn't get employment and she had children. That right there, he talks about the unequal division of property, which occasions the numberless instances of wretchedness. That would be an affronted word, that he calls it wretchedness. That it's concentrated in very few hands. There are so many servants, so many poor who can't find work. And then here he talks about how whenever there is in any country uncultivated land and unemployed poor, it is clear that the laws of property have been so far extended as to violate natural right. And so, like, these people's rights are being violated. That would be him being affronted by it. So throughout the passage, he does talk about that multiple times, that he is upset with how the poor are being treated in France. And so I like C. Let's look at D. He is pleased that the United States, we haven't said a word about United States. And so get rid of it. Don't assume that he's comparing France to the United States if we don't even say the word United States. So we got to go with C. Number 10, Jefferson's statement that he is conscious that an equal division of property is impracticable implies that he. And so here with 10, we have an evidence one. And so let's go read this beginning paragraph again. So I'm conscious that an equal division of property is impracticable. We understand that. He recognizes it's not practical to divide property equally. But the consequences of this enormous inequality producing so much misery to the bulk of mankind, so like it is bad, legislators cannot invent too many devices for subdividing property, only taking care to let their subdivisions go hand in hand with the natural affections of the human mind. And so, while the division of property is really hard thing to tackle, he says that the legislators can't invent too many devices. And so, like, we should just keep trying different devices. And then he gives two different suggestions about lessening the taxes and then giving, equal inheritance. And so let's look at our answer choices there and then see if we like any of those. And then maybe we can match it up with some text on number 11. Because I am, for the most part, understanding what he's talking about here. If I really didn't have any clue what he's talking about, then that's where you can look at 11 and see, can I understand any of these and match them up with one of these choices on 10? But I'm going to go through my choices on 10 first. And so what's he implying there? He has decided that there's no point in pursuing his goals because they would ultimately prove impossible to carry out. Notice this but right here. That is carrying a lot of weight. And so he says, I know they're impractical, but. And so that but is going to give us an opposite. And so A would be eliminated just based on that one opposite word. He knows that his ideals are not entirely realistic, Yet, ooh, that would be a ding, ding, ding moment with the but, yet still believes that some improvement is possible. I like that. C, does not care about what is realistically possible, but is only concerned with the way that things should be. I think he's trying to make some realistic choices here to make it better. And so I do think he cares about what's realistically possible. So let's get rid of C. D, believes that even though property cannot be divided equally, it should still be divided according to man's abilities. I don't think he's talking about abilities here. And so let's get rid of D. So I like B for this. And then let's see if we can match it up with one of these pieces of evidence. And so I like this idea, but the consequences of this enormous inequality producing so much misery to the bulk of mankind, legislators cannot invent too many devices for the subdividing property. And so I like that idea that the legislators can't come up with enough things. They can just keep trying to come up with more devices to help divide property equally. So I like C for that.